everyone. Welcome to the ninth edition of Minerva Project's Inside Voices. As the name suggests, Inside Voices is a series of candid conversations with leaders from inside higher education. The discussion centers on the journey of institutional transformation, an often bumpy set of challenges and triumphs that all innovative leaders must navigate. My name's Christine Lucer. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I'm head of solution design at Minerva Project. I'm passionate about helping universities see how innovating on their learning model can help them differentiate and improve student outcomes. Our conversation today includes Suzanne Dove, Assistant Vice President for Strategy and Innovation at Bentley University, and Abha Ahuja, one of my favorite colleagues and a Senior Director at Minerva Project. Today, we're going to explore the challenges and opportunities of designing interdisciplinary skills taxonomies by sharing the experiences of Bentley's leading business transformation and health program and discussing some of Minerva Project's partnerships around the globe that are focused on innovation and change management. This is a session about skills taxonomies, but they're really just a tool and only as useful as what you do with them. So, Abha, let's get aligned on the same page. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean when you say skills taxonomy and how that relates to transformation?
All right. So what is a learning taxonomy? The learning taxonomy, it is a tool, right? It provides a structure that allows educational programs and institutions to very precisely define the specific skills that learners must apply to demonstrate certain abilities or competencies. We have a nice slide that illustrates an example. For instance, an objective that I hear often is we want to prepare our learners to become critical thinkers or better, more effective communicators. But what does that entail? What does that mean, right? And so as you can see in this example, what the learning taxonomy does, it breaks down these broad competencies like critical thinking into more specific sub-competencies, categories. Here we have evaluating claims and decision-making. Then we're linking these narrower categories, narrower sub-competencies into the measurable and concrete learning outcomes that are associated with these specific skills. And what we want is we want that learners can apply these skills across various courses. So what our taxonomy is doing is it's integrating courses across an institution. It's creating a common language for the learners, for the instructors and course designers, and for folks who are evaluating programs, and really helping them to align their definitions and expectations.
One of the things I love about what you just described is this idea of a common language, because we know that that is really important for change. If we're all saying something that's similar but using totally different language, that's almost as bad as all saying different things and going in 100 different directions. So there's an efficiency there if we're thinking about how to move our institutions into more effective practices. Suzanne, you just wrote a book called Well in the Lead, and I know you think a lot about how to manage change, but really lead change. I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about your framework around that. And then at the end, what a learning taxonomy might be able to do to help you implement that change process.
Sure, happy to speak to that, Christine. So I've been working in academic innovation for over 10 years, and typically family and friends would ask, well, wait, what do you do exactly? And so I realized I needed to kind of be able to articulate it in a way that was easy for me to remember and would hopefully translate to people from many different backgrounds. And so I came up with this three-part structure framework that has actually really served me very well. And I'll be glad to offer it here. And I would love to know if others find that this resonates with the work that you do and the way that you approach academic innovation or leading change in your institutions. So the way I think about it for myself and what's allowed me to really be successful at this is three parts. I need to be able to inspire, empower, and equip. And when I say inspire, I think about, I need to earn the right to or gain the trust with different groups and identify what are the audiences where I can engage, and then hopefully get people thinking that there is even an issue to be addressed. Like, why would we even innovate? We need to understand that there's a need, there's some sort of problem to be solved, if you like. Why are we doing this? And so inspiring people to get involved in this work is the first step. The second step is empowering. I firmly believe, as a leader, I do not want to be involved in initiatives that are just top down, imposed on people, and just telling them to go and just come along and just do it because we said so. And I think any of us who work in an academic institution know that that's typically not going to work very well.
Academics love being told what to do.
Yeah, so finding ways to empower people in the work that they do, and find, opportunities to offer that, create those frameworks or create that shared language. That's a second step. And then a third step is to equip people. Folks need to know, how do I get involved? How do I make sure I have the ability to do this? And I think, specifically to your the last part of your question, where does a learning taxonomy or a skills taxonomy fit in this? It could actually fit at all three levels, but especially the sort of equipping people, giving them a language, I think is really powerful. And it's a language that resonates with many faculty groups. And happy to talk a little bit more about that in the Bentley story of leading business transformation in health.
Yeah, to double click on that, this idea that it gives people a common language and it gives them this it feels like that is something that starts with the inspire aspect. You can lead a vision around changing the content of education to focus on practical knowledge. And then you can say, hey, I trust you to take this into your own disciplines. And then you're equipping them with that common language to not entirely change their teaching practice, but really say, how are the things I'm doing already connect to the broader whole? So I love that. And it is all really beautiful in practice. Abha, how do you get started on this?
How do you get started? Yes, great question. And I'm inspired by this three process framework. And really it starts with the big picture, the inspiration, right? It's really rooted in the mission and the values of what the institution or the program is about. And that's where we start. We start by really digging into what is the broader purpose, and what are the specific goals from student learning. Once we have that, that allows us to then specify I start identifying sort of what the more specific skills are. But it's really, again, like, it's nice to see sort of inspire as being sort of that first step, which really comes back to the mission and the purpose.
But can I ask you a follow-up question before you plow
Yeah.
on that? When you're talking about the purpose, there's two different versions. One is like, what's the purpose for students? And then there's one which is, what's the purpose for an institution? And those should be very tightly aligned. But I'm wondering if you can talk about what kind of problem we're trying to solve by going back to those student learning outcomes.
Yeah, and I think part of the answer is in your question, right? Like, the alignment between the institutional's broader goals and how student learning is going to align with them is in this learning taxonomy. How do we then have this common framework that unites and makes a cohesive framework for exactly that?
Yeah, and that's where I think it can be really powerful to say, like, what is our challenge? Are we trying to get more students in the door by explaining what this common language is going to do for them? Are we trying to not worry about more students coming, but the kinds of students we're going to produce? Suzanne, I saw you nod at some of that. What do you think the problems that a learning taxonomy might help institutions solve are?
Mm. So many things. So at a very highest level, I have found, that if you forced me to pick, like, what is the one most impactful lever that we have in order to spur or incentivize or move forward on academic transformation, I would have to say that engaging faculty in serious conversations about learning outcomes or learning taxonomies would probably be up there, maybe the most impactful if you had to pick just one. If you think about
Why?
that, well,
Yeah.
stop and think about it, right? Like, there's so many things that happen in an innovation in an innovation and effort and transformation. And you pointed to it at your intro. It's sort of a bumpy road filled with different challenges, filled with different things that people try. But if you think about the conversation around learning outcomes, what I have found with my own teaching and with faculty conversations, so, hundreds of them that I've been involved with, there's that light bulb moment where someone goes, oh, so I'm not just a content deliverer. I'm not just an expert who's disseminating knowledge to, people's heads or having them write it down in their notebook. I am facilitating learning. I had so many faculty who've said to me, and especially I work in business education. And so especially business faculty have this image of a super dynamic, case study leader with amazing PowerPoint slides. And I've had people say to me, I've been just trying to get my PowerPoint slides better and better. And I've gotten to the point I can't get any better. And I'll stop and ask them, well, what actually is it that you want your students to learn? And you see the light bulb go on. So I think it's an incredibly powerful, simple, maybe more complicated than it sounds, but simple lever that we can use to really get that innovation train going.
Like many things, I think it is simple in theory and beautiful and clear. And then the messy part is, how do you get people to realize that the simplicity of it actually requires a lot of work? So Abha, that brings us back to kind of where I started. You start with vision and purpose. And then what's the next set of actions that you take to align people?
So part of the sort of, again, I want to pick up a little bit on what Suzanne was saying there as well around sort of faculty. What happens is in our sort of four-year large institutions, they tend to be very siloed across, disciplinary boundaries. And now you're telling these experts that have very specialized language to talk about different things to come together and create this shared language for the institution.
Easy peasy.
So that really, yeah. So that really is what the challenge is around. And again, going back to sort of the mission and the purpose allows us to start moving towards that common language. And maybe using an example will help me sort of illustrate the process. One of our partners in Mexico City, a new university, Universidad de la Libertad, we collaborated with them on developing a taxonomy. And we started with what is the mission? What are the core values? And entrepreneurship emerged as one of their core values. And from there, we really started the process of deconstructing. What does entrepreneurship look like? What are the behaviors and the attributes that learners would embody to display this competency? And you really start sort of breaking it down from there and build your structure. But that's not the end. What's really critical, I think, actually, is once you build out the structure, is the iteration part. Once you actually implement this taxonomy across your curriculum, that's when you're really learning how these learning outcomes are playing out in the classroom. Have we got the right level of granularity? Sometimes we find that we might be defining a skill too narrowly and it's really not applied. Learners really just don't have the opportunity to apply it, or it may be too broadly defined and now its application is really messy and very hard to track. Because ultimately we want to be able to assess learner progress and learner development of these skills. So it's about building out the taxonomy, implementing it in the classroom, and really learning from what's going on in the classroom and how learners are applying to then refine this taxonomy and define the skills appropriately.
And I love your focus on saying that we have to really look at the behaviors people would do so that we can say, yes, they have acquired this skill. Because I think we've gotten pretty good at getting faculty to think about learning outcomes as bullet points on a syllabus. Yes, your class has to have learning outcomes. Yes, you have to say what the purpose is. But if I think back to the ones that I used to write when I didn't have a lot of instruction about how to think in this common language, interdisciplinary way, I would say things like, a learning outcome for this course is to look under the hood at the cognitive processes at play when we negotiate with others. And like, that's not helping anyone. That's just describing what we're going to do in class, not saying what I want you to be able to do outside in the real world with this piece of practical knowledge. So Suzanne, with that in mind, doing outside in the real world is particularly important for Bentley's leading business transformation in health, because this is focused on executive education learners. So can you tell us a little bit about that program? And then I'll double click into some of the learning taxonomy questions I have for you.
Definitely. Super excited to talk about our program, Leading Business Transformation in Health. It's a really distinctive executive education offering. Bentley, as some of you may know, is a business-focused university, and we happen to have a lot of faculty who are super interested and energized by the health industry, seeing it as a massive problem, at least in the United States. And an opportunity to bring our interdisciplinary arts and sciences and business faculty expertise to try to solve some of those problems. And so executive education is a perfect sandbox for us to play in and experiment in. We have the chance to work with working professionals. Leading business transformation for health in health is designed for a broad set of people working in the health industry. This could be clinical and non-clinical professionals. It could include people who are working in sort of traditional health delivery, but it could also include payers. It could include other sort of adjacent areas such as medical device sales, pharmaceutical, biotech. You know, it's really broad right now. And that's something we can talk a little bit more about later. But our the way that we designed this course, it's a 6-week program, and it's divided into 3 parts. So the first part is really to understand systems thinking, so that learners can make sense of the complexity of the health industry that they're working in, and sort of see where their part fits with other parts. And that's one of the benefits, we think, of bringing together people from these different parts of the bigger complex system. The second component is on leading with purpose and emotional intelligence. And it's really about, you know, bringing people together around that shared purpose and then mobilizing effective teams and collaboration. And then the final part is on problem analysis and decision making, and using some of the business tools that our faculty bring a lot of expertise in, sort of analysis, data, but you know, bringing those tools to play and really allowing people. And I think it's been super interesting to experiment with this course and pilot it, because it is, as you said, Christine, these are people who are applying this as they're taking the course. So they're immersed in the field already, and really good dialogue can happen between them and the faculty, and then just amongst the whole class. Our hope is that they learn as much from one another as they do from the lesson plans the faculty have developed.
So when you said that they learn as much from each other as they do from the faculty and the lesson plans, it sounds like the experience is really built around a community model where it's not the sage on the stage who's doing what you described before, is like making sure their PowerPoints are really pretty. Can you tell us a little bit about what happens in a class session that lets people do that social learning and why it's important?
Sure. Yeah, so all of the class sessions are designed around experiential learning and active learning using Minerva Forum. It really facilitates that engagement and dialogue. That is some of the feedback that we got from the first round of the first pilot offering that we did last May and June, where the learners commented how much the platform and the design of the course really supported a facilitation model, and that there was a lot of time spent speaking together rather than, you know, just passively listening or taking notes on what the faculty member was saying.
That's really helpful. And I think one of the things that's really nice is once you have those skills in mind, the faculty's job becomes almost like creating a jungle gym to be able to say, how can we play with these ideas in community and really see where it's useful outside of the classroom and bring that in so that people can learn by processing their own experience, but also by having such a diverse group of professionals learn through other people's experiences as well. And it pushes against this model of like, I need to show up and I need to learn this one specific topic in marketing, which is probably useful for some people, but might be better suited for an asynchronous environment instead of a rich discussion around applying skills out in the real world. So, Suzanne, what are some of those skills you've put into that taxonomy for the Bentley set of programs?
A couple examples that come to mind, and I loved what you were talking about earlier, Abha, around sort of purpose. Bentley, as I said, is a really interdisciplinary business university, and so really values bringing in the expertise from people in different departments that aren't like maybe the traditional business discipline. So one example of a skill that was selected by the faculty, we came together in a group, but mostly it was faculty led, working with the Minerva team and my own team. They identified managing bias as one example that's introduced in this first module on systems thinking, so that people can start to understand, where does bias come from and how does it impact the behaviors of the people around me. And so really trying to apply that then in a health industry, you can imagine all kinds of interesting insights that people might gain that would really open up their ability to understand the system. And then it translates or transfers into the next module, which is around the team dynamics and effective leadership and team motivations. A second example that I just love this one, so I have to share, remembering back to that cold January day when we were in the Badavas Center, which is our innovation center at Bentley that I founded 5 years ago now, my goodness. We were doing this sort of sticky note exercise on the whiteboard about which of these skills, which of these taxonomies would be represented in leading business transformation and health. And one of our faculty, who's in the management department, not really considering herself a health expert at all, but very interested in positive psychology and teams and team dynamics and ethical and empathic leadership.
Yep.
And she picked up on the hashtag power dynamics. And she pointed to that one and said, I think we need this to be in this course. She commented how, she recognized, and I think we all can see this, as all of us are probably consumers of health services, even if we may not be health professionals ourselves, the power dynamics that can come into play through the different identities, professional affiliations, backgrounds that people have when they interact with the healthcare system or work in the healthcare system themselves. Those dynamics can really impact the way that teams of healthcare providers, for example, work together. And so that was an important one to bring into this course.
And that's a really beautiful thing about picking durable transferable skills as the basis for a learning taxonomy, is that they go so much further than the particular course topic. They're really useful no matter what students end up doing after the fact, whether that's switching professions, whether it's doing a job that doesn't exist yet. And all of this preparation in the classroom is really about picking up that skill and making them flexible thinkers to see how it applies really broadly. And power dynamics, as well as managing bias, are two really crucial ones that we see. We've talked a lot about the beautiful model that we will create and the way we can help students see the red thread throughout their education. But when we're thinking about moving from theory to practice, Abha, what challenges do institutions typically run into when they're developing and implementing a skills taxonomy?
Yeah, the challenge, we spoke a little bit earlier about, bringing faculty from diverse perspectives, diverse fields, and getting them to really collaborate on developing a shared language. That sort of is the central challenge. But also, when you're talking about a taxonomy, at the scale of, say, a 4-year program or a 4-year institution, it's a significant task, right? The sheer size of a learning taxonomy, when you start to think about the durable interdisciplinary skills, it can become quite overwhelming. And so just the task in it, the size of the taxonomy in itself requires the type of collaborative, interdisciplinary, cross-institutional effort, which is challenging. And really, then it comes down to the process, having a really good process in place, and going back to inspire, right? Communicating why this taxonomy is important and how it's going to benefit our students and how it's going to benefit the institution.
I'm happy to weigh in a little bit on that as well.
Please do, Suzanne.
Helpful from the front lines. So yeah, I think it's important not to put on our rose-colored glasses. This is really hard work, and it takes time. So a couple of things that I'm happy to share, that I've tried and I've seen these work, and then I'm also happy to share some of the realities of even trying these things. But finding, as Abha said, finding a small way to experiment with this, maybe not tackling a 4-year program or a 3-year graduate program, but finding like what is a small increment that we could tackle. Maybe it's one course, maybe it's a capstone, maybe in our case it's executive and professional education, because those are sort of shorter. They don't involve all of the faculty governance that can get lots and lots and lots of people involved. Sometimes, it's an advantage to be able to work with just a couple of faculty who are willing to experiment. And we had to be really humble, bring your humility and just say, we don't know exactly, we haven't done a skills taxonomy at Bentley. Of course, Bentley has learning outcomes, but they're great, but in some ways they're similar to some of the things Christine described earlier.
They're just different.
Yeah. So, and we want to be able to translate them to professional audiences. Professional audiences, I can tell you, are not excited to hear about learning outcomes. That's maybe just table stakes, but a skills taxonomy, that's different. So finding a small increment, being able to experiment, being humble about it, and setting out being realistic about what is the time commitment involved. That was really important for me to be able to bring my ethical leadership lens that I wanted to commit to faculty. This is not going to take up, hours and hours of your life. We broke it down actually into how many hours of your time are we asking for? What's the structure going to be? What is the good process, as Abha said? And I have to give a huge shout out to the Minerva Project team. You were so helpful in working with me, and you've done this with so many other institutions that you were really able to give me a realistic expectation of how much time it would take, and who else is going to be part of the team. So I think those are some suggestions that I would give. And even still, we did run into some questions, and faculty wanted to know, well, okay, skills taxonomy, that's great, but what's the content that I'm going to be teaching? So we did have to come back to that a number of times.
I think one of the things I appreciated about what you said, Suzanne, was finding the space where your institution can innovate. And sometimes that is in something like a short program like you all did. But I want to push back on you, because you didn't just design a short program with its own little baby skills taxonomy that'll exist here at the 6-week program forever. You went for a much bigger model approach, which will bootstrap the quickness with which you'll be able to develop future programs. So that's more of an institutional lens. That's not like, let's experiment and pilot over here, but really thinking about how to lay that foundation for change. And we've seen this across different partnerships. Abha, you worked on the Libertad program, which was huge. We were building it from scratch. And there's other programs that have really gone to the heart of the educational model instead of finding a smaller place to start. I think Miami might be a good example of this, but if you have one in mind that you want to talk about with big institutional transformation in mind, maybe Zayed, please jump in, because I think there's a yes and approach here where you want to think big picture, even figuring out which one fits your context.
Yeah, I love the Zayed example, right? Libertad, was a brand new university. It was an opportunity to start from scratch. Zayed is an existing, long-standing, reputed federal institution, large institution in the United Arab Emirates. And we collaborated with them to really sort of transform their programs to an interdisciplinary lens. And so that's where the learning taxonomy and the process really facilitated the alignment, as we've been talking about, the definition, like what are the specific attributes and skills that transcend disciplinary boundaries that will serve their purpose and their learning goals, that allows us to build this cohesive program. I love that you brought up managing bias. It's one of my favorite skills as well. And so once we were able to define for them a skill like, say, managing bias, they were able to think about how are we going to implement this in different types of courses with different content areas, as we were speaking before. You can apply it in the context of now that you have this very clear expectation in the context of a communications course around how to consume information. You can apply the same skill in the context of a course around marketing research and collecting information about your audience, or a science course and how to avoid biases in your research. And so defining those skills very clearly then allows them to scaffold them across their curriculum in a cohesive manner.
What I love about that is I think it really digs into what makes a skills taxonomy successful and unique when you come at it from an interdisciplinary approach. It's not faculty listing their own siloed learning outcomes. It's going back to the purpose of the institution and giving everyone a language to row in the same direction. And one of the things I found with working with faculty is they are concerned about their content, like Suzanne said, but if you explain the relationship between content as the vehicle to teach them skills that will be useful no matter what, everyone comes in and says, oh, wait, I was already teaching some version of this anyway. Like, of course, I want people to know the difference between a fact and a claim. I want them to be able to say, oh, I have a sunk cost bias and I'm exhibiting it here when I keep going after this particular kind of grant application just because that's the research I've done before. Or I'm investing in a marketing campaign just because we already started it. So you can use these skills across disciplines, and being able to thread that for students is really the job of faculty to bring that to life. Suzanne, how did you get people to understand that? Because you said that they asked about what happens to my content.
I think it's still a work in progress. As you said, often people do see, oh, okay, I have been teaching this and I've kind of assumed that they, critical thinking, and then breaking critical thinking down with managing bias being one of the components. I think often we find people just saying, well, of course, it's important that my students learn critical thinking, and they practice it through the following ways. But often people haven't broken it into even smaller components, like you were just describing earlier, Abha, with how you actually build a skills taxonomy. They've not necessarily deconstructed it into what are the different component parts of critical thinking, and which of those parts am I best equipped or most relevant to the course that I teach. But yeah, it's definitely a work in progress. It's not going to, in my experience anyway, it's not usually just one conversation, it's multiple, because these are habits that people have developed over decades. Our faculty are so experienced and so wonderful in the classroom, and what they've been doing has been working for them often. And so it takes, it's a process. It takes a number of conversations and people's opportunity to practice it. And so I think that's another advantage to the executive and professional education space, which is it's practicing it for 6 weeks instead of 16 weeks, of course, across a semester.
And you have all these opportunities to bring in that outside learning that people are doing, and you can assign them, like, go do this in your workplace and bring it back. So I think executive education is where you can compress a lot of learning. One thing that I know about your program, Suzanne, was that faculty initially thought that they weren't going to assess learning outcomes at all. They weren't going to give feedback on it. And so I want to take a step back and say, Abha, once we pick these skills, how do we assess them? And then Suzanne, what was that process of working with faculty to think about doing that feel like? So Abha, we want skills. How does assessment tie into this?
Great question. And really, how do you help faculty and also learners, right, wrap their head around assessing for process? Once we have these very clearly defined learning outcomes, we're of course building out our curriculum in ways that target these learning outcomes. We are designing activities and assessments where learners have the opportunity to apply these, and more importantly, reflect on their application, right? So now we're talking about metacognition. I applied the skill around managing bias. How did I apply it? I think really encouraging learners and building in opportunities for them to reflect on their application allows us to assess both their understanding their application and their metacognition of that aspect. The other special thing is you can assess on learning outcomes, but because we have this nice hierarchical structure, you can track their progress at various levels of those categories and competencies as well.
I love that point because what it means is that students start to actually understand what being a good critical thinker is. If I say just think more critically, people are like, but if you have that taxonomy that says, hey, these are the specific things you can do that ladder up to this, that ladder up to that, it makes it much easier to deliver on the promise that most universities do of creating critical and creative thinkers. Suzanne, when we come in and we work with faculty to say, okay, you've kind of wrapped your head around a skills model, but it's really important to give people feedback on those skills. How did that unfold for you?
So our faculty, of course, are accustomed to working with degree-seeking students, and they do all the kinds of traditional forms of assignments, assessments, and feedback that most of us would do when we're in a university, right? We're an accredited institution, and so that's part of the formula, if you like. That said, working on the non-degree side, there, I think a lot of non-degree programs sort of assume that the learner just comes in, does what, they have their own goals in mind, they do whatever they're going to do with the program content or offering, and then they leave. And there certainly is no accreditation requirement of doing evaluation there. And I think in this particular case of leading business transformation in health, the faculty members were a little concerned that, these are health industry professionals. Are they going to want to hear? There was a concern about, they're going to be resistant to receiving a grade from me as the faculty member. And so what we were able to work on was changing the language back to common language, changing the language from assessment to feedback.
Yeah.
I think we can all appreciate how we really grow and develop when we get honest feedback. And so that was the way that we were able to, faculty became comfortable with providing feedback to the participants in this executive education program.
And I think what's really beautiful about that is we know that high stakes assessments are bad, but when people think about low stakes assessments, like, well, what does that mean? And it means frequent formative feedback. And so if you're trying to give faculty a way to do that well, a quick assessment on a short poll that you've built into an active learning class is a moment where you've created something where I'm collecting data that I can give you feedback on. And really being able to think about the design of active learning as a frame to create these accessible moments for small moments of frequent formative feedback can be a really powerful shift in faculty accepting a new model. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, and I think it's so important actually as an additional outcome. Maybe it's another skill that I haven't even thought of until right now, but back to the metacognition point that you were making earlier, Abha, which is just sort of for all of us, but especially for those of us who are in the workforce, getting to where we can kind of assess our own level of preparedness on something and where we feel like we need to still grow more, or we've mastered something. I think building in those checks as you described, Christine, those polls, that's a way to help all of us, check ourselves and see, do I feel like I'm really solid on this still already, or do I feel like I still need a bit more guidance, or I would benefit from having a conversation with a colleague to check, am I really getting this right?
Yeah, that's really wonderful. As we come to the end of our time, I always like to end on the advice note. We're all showing up because we are thinking about these ideas and we want to make sure that there are some actionable takeaways. I'll go to Abha first in terms of advice. What advice do you have for everyone who came to learn about skills taxonomies if they're thinking about implementing them in their own institution?
Really, two small takeaways here. One, I want to go back to the importance of process, right? I mean, here at Minerva Project, we've worked on building taxonomies from scratch, from existing frameworks, and building learning taxonomies, specific programs. And what has really emerged is the importance of a process. The process really helps with faculty buy-in, with facilitating the type of collaborative cross-institutional effort that is needed. So that's one, the importance of the process. And the second is, again, going back to really communicating the why we are doing this, why it's important to build a cohesive journey for your learners. What are the benefits to students by having this type of framework? I think is really key to ask yourself and then communicate with your stakeholders.
That's really lovely. And Suzanne, what have you learned in this process that you think will really benefit other people?
I would say start with figuring out how to right size it. What's the right increment of innovation that you can take on that's going to be feasible, that you'll be able to learn from. So how to pilot, and without losing sight of that big picture, as you said earlier, Christine. So that's I think one really important way to start. And then if I could add one other, I think it's figuring out sort of what are some communities maybe that already exist at your university that you might engage with. Um, whether there are faculty learning communities, or whether there are, interdisciplinary cluster hires that are happening at your university, but try to find, there tend to be these sort of little kind of innovative groups at most of our institutions. And I feel like those are often really helpful places to come in and just talk with people. They may have great advice. They may want to get involved in a pilot, but look for those sort of pollinator groups.
That is a great metaphor. Last time we did this, it was about experiential learning, and we had a whole metaphor around community gardens. So I love where we are going with making sure that things grow in benefit of student success. All right, this has been wonderful. I want to take a minute to thank both of our guests for their insights and all of the participants for their active listening and engagement throughout. As you know, innovation in higher education is a difficult road, and the only way we will be able to make progress is by having audacious goals, but working together and learning from one another.